There comes a moment in life, my dear, when winning has nothing to do with talent and everything to do with whether you are willing to keep showing up when nobody claps for you, when nothing seems to move, when your heart is tired, and when the world quietly whispers, maybe it's time to stop. Take a breath with me for a moment, slowly, gently, and just allow yourself to arrive here. Because I have a feeling you did not find these words by accident. Maybe you are exhausted from trying. Maybe you are carrying invisible disappointments that nobody else fully understands. Maybe you have started over so many times that even hope feels heavy now. And yet, something inside you is still alive. Something inside you still wants to believe there is a reason you keep getting back up. That matters more than you know. You see, sweetheart, the people who eventually create beautiful lives are not always the smartest people in the room. They are not always the most confident. They are not always the most gifted. So often, they are simply the ones who refuse to disappear, the ones who kept taking one more step while everyone else quietly gave up. And I want you to understand something very deeply today. Your life is not being shaped only by your victories. It is being shaped by your willingness to remain present during the seasons where nothing appears to be happening. That is where identity is formed. That is where strength quietly grows roots underground. A seed does not break through the soil the day it is planted. For a while, it looks like nothing is happening at all. Imagine if the seed decided it was failing simply because it could not yet see the flower. Imagine if it gave up beneath the earth because the timing felt too slow. My dear, so many people walk away from their own becoming because they mistake invisible growth for failure. But invisible does not mean absent. Take another breath. There are things unfolding inside you right now that your eyes cannot yet measure. Maybe you have been trying to heal, trying to create a new life, trying to become more disciplined, trying to manifest abundance, trying to build something meaningful, trying to love yourself after years of abandonment. And perhaps part of you secretly wonders, why is it taking so long? Oh, sweetheart, what if the delay is not punishment? What if life has not forgotten you at all? What if something deeper is happening? You see, when people think about success, they usually imagine a moment, a breakthrough, a finish line, a sudden transformation. But true transformation is rarely dramatic while it is happening. Most of the time, it feels repetitive, quiet, ordinary. You wake up, you try again, you fail again, you doubt yourself, you continue anyway. And somewhere in those ordinary moments, a new self is slowly being born. That is why consistency is sacred. Not because every day feels magical, but because every time you continue, you send a message to your nervous system that says, I am still here. I still believe my life is worth showing up for. Can you feel how important that is? Especially after disappointment. Especially after rejection. Especially after nobody noticed your effort. There is a kind of emotional maturity that develops when you stop needing immediate proof before continuing. And that maturity changes everything. Because the truth is, most people stop too early. They stop right before the inner shift. Right before momentum begins. Right before the universe finally has enough energy to rearrange itself around their persistence. Think about water, my dear. Water shapes mountains not through force, but through continual movement. Softness can carve stone when it refuses to stop flowing. And maybe that is the kind of strength you are learning now. not loud strength, not performative strength, but quiet endurance, the kind that keeps loving, keeps trying, keeps believing, keeps showing up, even after tears, even after confusion, even after long seasons of silence. I want you to ask yourself something honestly. What if your breakthrough is not waiting for perfection? What if it is simply waiting for your continued presence? Because life responds differently to people who remain available to possibility. There is energy in staying open. There is power in refusing to close your heart completely. And yes, I know there are moments when quitting feels safer. Of course there are. If you stop trying, you no longer risk disappointment. If you stop dreaming, you no longer risk heartbreak. If you convince yourself that nothing will work, then at least you cannot be surprised anymore. But sweetheart, that is not peace. That is emotional self-protection disguised as certainty. And your soul deserves more than survival. Your soul deserves expansion. You deserve to discover what happens when you stop abandoning yourself halfway through the journey. Take a slow breath again. I want you to notice how often your mind tries to measure your worth based on visible results. How much money have I made? How quickly am I healing? How far ahead are other people? Why hasn't my manifestation arrived yet? But healing does not always look productive at first. Growth does not always look impressive. Sometimes growth looks like resting instead of collapsing. Sometimes it looks like trying again after humiliation. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to hate yourself today. Sometimes it looks like getting out of bed with a heavy heart and still deciding to continue. And I need you to hear this clearly. That counts. That matters. Do not underestimate the spiritual power of continuing. Every time you continue with love instead of bitterness, you strengthen a new emotional pathway within yourself. Every time you show up again instead of disappearing into hopelessness, you become more available to the future you desire. The universe often responds to stability before speed, and stability is created through repetition, not glamorous repetition, sacred repetition. The mother bird does not abandon the nest because the egg has not hatched by morning. The sun does not refuse to rise because yesterday was cloudy. Nature understands timing far better than human fear does. And perhaps you are being invited to trust timing instead of fighting it, because timing is not always delay. Sometimes timing is preparation. Sometimes life is strengthening your emotional capacity so you can hold what you are asking for without losing yourself. Can you imagine receiving everything you desire while still carrying deep self-hatred, deep fear, deep instability? You might sabotage it without even realizing. That is why your inner world matters so much. Who are you becoming while you wait? That question changes everything, because eventually manifestation stops being about forcing outcomes and becomes about alignment. The energy of your future is shaped by the emotional identity you practice repeatedly today. So if you wake up every morning believing you are defeated, unwanted, unlucky, forgotten, your body begins rehearsing that reality emotionally. But if you slowly begin showing up with softness, with openness, with willingness, then something extraordinary begins changing beneath the surface. Your nervous system starts learning safety again. Your heart starts opening again. Your mind starts expecting possibility instead of disappointment. And this is why not quitting matters so deeply. Not because persistence magically controls life, but because persistence transforms you. The version of you who keeps showing up is not the same version of you who once believed they could not survive difficult seasons. You are becoming emotionally stronger every time you continue. Even now, especially now. Sweetheart, I want you to place your hand over your heart for a moment. Just there, softly, and breathe. Feel your body. Feel your presence. Feel the fact that despite everything you have endured, you are still here. That is not weakness. That is extraordinary resilience. You do not need to have everything figured out today. You do not need to know exactly how the future will unfold. You only need to remain willing to take the next gentle step. That is enough. Sometimes people imagine successful lives are created through giant leaps, but more often they are created through small moments, repeated consistently. A person writes 1 page a day. One day it becomes a book. A person walks every morning. One day their body transforms. A person speaks kindly to themselves, little by little. One day, they no longer recognize the voice of self-hatred. Transformation rarely announces itself dramatically in the beginning. It whispers, quietly, patiently, and many people miss it because they are searching for fireworks instead of noticing the subtle shift happening inside their spirit. Maybe you are already changing more than you realize. Maybe the fact that you are still trying means the transformation has already begun. Take another breath, my dear. There is something beautiful that happens when you stop asking, "How fast can I arrive?" and begin asking, "How lovingly can I continue?" Because rushing creates pressure, but devotion creates peace, and life blooms differently inside peaceful energy. I know the modern world teaches you to obsess over immediate results, faster success, faster healing, faster manifestations, faster everything. But the soul does not bloom under pressure. The soul blooms through safety, through patience, through consistent love. So perhaps your greatest victory will not come from forcing life to happen faster. Perhaps it will come from finally learning how to remain faithful to yourself even during uncertain seasons. That changes a person forever. And when you truly understand this, quitting starts feeling different. Because you realize quitting is not only about stopping a task. Sometimes quitting means emotionally leaving yourself behind. And my dear, I do not want you to leave yourself behind anymore. Not now. Not when you have already survived so much. Not when your future self may one day look back and whisper, "Thank you for continuing." You may not see the full picture yet, but something is growing. Something is rearranging. Something is softening within you. And one day you will realize the reason you won was not because life was easy. It was because you kept showing up long enough for your inner world to change. And once the inner world changes, the outer world eventually follows. And perhaps that is the part nobody tells you, sweetheart. The moment your life truly begins changing is often the exact moment when you feel the most tempted to stop. Not because you are failing, but because transformation asks something very uncomfortable from the human heart. It asks you to continue before you see evidence. Take a breath with me, slowly, because I know how exhausting that can feel sometimes. To keep watering the garden before flowers appear. To keep loving yourself while old wounds still ache, to keep believing in your future while your present reality looks unchanged. It can feel lonely, can't it? Especially when other people seem to move faster. Especially when you secretly wonder if maybe you missed your chance. But my dear, life is not a race between souls. A flower does not compete with another flower blooming beside it. The rose does not panic because the sunflower opened first. Nature understands that every living thing unfolds according to its own timing. Only human beings have learned to shame themselves for growing slowly. And maybe today is the day you stop doing that. Maybe today is the day you stop treating your journey like a punishment simply because it is taking time. Because I want you to understand something very gently. There are seasons where your only job is to keep showing up emotionally for your own becoming, not perfectly, not flawlessly, just honestly. There is incredible power in honest effort. The universe responds differently to authenticity than it does to performance. And for so long, many people have been trying to manifest from exhaustion instead of alignment. They chase, they force, they beg life to hurry. They believe if they worry enough, overthink enough, struggle enough, then somehow they will earn their future faster. But sweetheart, you cannot force a sunrise. You cannot pull a flower open before it is ready. And you cannot emotionally bully yourself into peace. That is why learning to continue softly matters so much. Not with desperation, not with panic, but with trust, quiet trust. The kind of trust that says, even if I cannot see the full picture today, I will not abandon myself. Can you feel how healing that is? Especially for a person who spent years believing their worth depended on immediate success. Because many people are not actually afraid of failure. They are afraid of what failure seems to say about them. If this didn't work, maybe I'm not enough. If progress is slow, maybe I'm broken. If I feel tired, maybe I'm weak. Oh, sweetheart, no, no. Your timing is not proof of your value. Your temporary exhaustion is not proof of weakness. And slow progress is still progress. Sometimes the strongest people are simply the ones who learned how to continue with a tender heart. That tenderness matters. Please do not harden yourself just because life has been difficult. I know the temptation. I know how easy it is to close emotionally after disappointment, to become cynical, to stop expecting beauty because expecting hurt feels safer. But the problem is, when you close yourself completely to pain, you also close yourself to possibility, and your future still needs your openness. Take another slow breath, let your shoulders relax. You do not have to carry your future with fear. You only have to remain available to it. That is why the smallest daily actions matter more than dramatic moments. A tiny act, repeated consistently, becomes identity. This is how lives transform. Not through one magical morning where everything changes instantly, but through gentle repetition. A person who says, I will try again today. A person who chooses one loving thought instead of one cruel thought. A person who keeps learning after embarrassment. A person who keeps creating after rejection. A person who keeps opening their heart after disappointment. That is sacred strength. And I think many people misunderstand what winning actually is. Winning is not avoiding failure. Winning is refusing to let failure define your identity. Because every successful person you admire has lived through invisible seasons nobody applauded. Seasons of uncertainty, seasons of self-doubt, seasons where they questioned everything, but they kept showing up. And eventually, their persistence became momentum. You see, my dear, momentum is not created in the moment of breakthrough. Momentum is created long before the breakthrough arrives. It is built quietly in repetition, like drops of water filling a hidden well, day after day, choice after choice, thought after thought. And one day, what once felt impossible suddenly begins moving naturally because the identity beneath it has changed. That is the real secret. Identity, not force, not pressure, identity. Because if you still see yourself as someone who always gives up, your nervous system will unconsciously pull you toward quitting the moment discomfort appears. But every time you continue despite discomfort, you begin rewriting that identity. You teach your body a new story. I am someone who stays. I am someone who keeps going. I am someone who can survive difficult emotions without collapsing. That changes your energy completely. And energy matters more than people realize. Not in some distant, mystical way only, but emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Your repeated emotional state becomes the atmosphere you live inside. If your inner world constantly says, "Nothing ever works for me," your body starts preparing for disappointment before life even unfolds. But if you slowly begin practicing openness, hope, patience, then your emotional world begins creating space for different experiences to enter. This is why awareness is so important, because many people unknowingly sabotage themselves through emotional exhaustion. They try so hard to protect themselves from disappointment that they stop fully participating in life altogether. They stop applying, stop creating, stop speaking, stop trusting, stop trying, and then they wonder why life feels frozen. But energy must move. Life responds to participation. Even the smallest movement matters. Even tiny acts of faith matter. A candle does not remove darkness by fighting it aggressively. It simply continues shining, and maybe that is your work right now. Not to force your life into immediate perfection, but to keep your light alive, to keep your spirit available, to keep showing up, especially on the days when nobody sees your effort, because those are often the days that shape you the most. Sweetheart, let me ask you something gently. What if the version of you are becoming is far more important than the timeline you are obsessing over? What if life is not only trying to give you results, but trying to deepen your capacity for peace, trust, resilience, softness, wisdom? Would you still continue if you knew your soul was being strengthened? I think part of healing is learning that not every meaningful transformation feels exciting while it is happening. Sometimes it feels repetitive. Sometimes it feels boring. Sometimes it feels slow. And yet beneath that slowness, entire emotional worlds are reorganizing themselves. The roots are growing. The foundation is strengthening. Your relationship with yourself is evolving. And one day, you suddenly realize you no longer react the same way. You no longer collapse as quickly. You no longer abandon yourself immediately after mistakes. You breathe differently. You think differently. You love differently. That is growth. And growth deserves patience. So tonight, or this morning, wherever you are listening from, I want you to stop measuring your life only by visible outcomes. Instead, ask yourself softly, am I becoming more loving toward myself? Am I learning how to stay? Am I more emotionally aware than I was before? Am I continuing even when it feels difficult? Because those quiet victories matter deeply, and they eventually create external change too. The world outside you often rearranges itself after the inner world becomes stable enough to hold new realities. That is why emotional consistency is powerful. Not perfection, consistency. A river reaches the ocean not because it moves perfectly in a straight line, but because it keeps flowing. You are allowed to rest, allowed to cry, allowed to feel uncertain sometimes. But do not confuse resting with quitting. There is a difference. Rest restores the soul. Quitting abandons it. And I think your spirit is asking for restoration now, not abandonment. So be gentle with yourself, please, especially during the chapters where results feel invisible. Those chapters matter too. Some of the most important things in life are formed in silence. Babies grow in darkness. Seeds grow underground. Healing happens beneath the surface long before symptoms disappear. And your future may already be unfolding in ways you cannot yet fully see. Take one more slow breath and let these words settle inside your heart. You are not behind. You are not ruined. You are not too late. You are becoming, quietly, slowly, beautifully. And every day you continue showing up with even the smallest amount of willingness. You strengthen the bridge between who you have been and who you are capable of becoming. One day, you will look back at these uncertain moments differently. You will realize they were not empty after all. They were building you. They were teaching you how to remain present, how to trust, how to endure without losing your softness, how to continue without losing your soul. And maybe that is the real victory. Not arriving untouched by hardship, but arriving with your heart still open despite it.